Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein, and yes, spring is in the air. 68 degrees here in New York City today, as the troops have gathered in Tampa, getting ready for that first spring training game on Friday against the Tigers of Detroit. March Madness on tap for you college hoops fans. And just 36 days now from opening day, so break out the peanuts, break out the Cracker Jack, grab your beverage of choice, and let's do this already. Please consider subscribing to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, and don't forget to rate and review us. Hit us up on Twitter at BombersPodcast is the handle, and we'll get into our Twitter poll later on here. The pros in Vegas have made their opening bid on win totals for all 30 Major League teams, and we'll see if you guys took the over or the under on the Yankees. You can like us on Facebook as well, or drop us a note. Send your comments and questions to joe at bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little later on Bronx Bombers, Jonathan Eig, author of Luckiest Man, the definitive biography of Lou Gehrig, will be rejoining the show for part 2 of our conversation. Also, I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers on whether or not ESPN Sunday Night Baseball is actually trying to drive away viewers. And in just a few moments, I go one-on-one with Yankees manager Aaron Boone. Well, kind of. I'll explain. But first, let's get you caught up in the latest headlines from Mike Moreno. Mike, what do you got?
Well, General Manager Brian Cashman, while refusing to call the Yankees World Series favorites, has made his objective clear: another championship. With spring training ramping into full gear this week, Cashman said, quote, "I've got rings, but there are guys in that clubhouse that don't. Some have rings from somewhere else, but they want a Yankee ring. Having a championship ring with the NY on it means more than any of the other ones out there, in my opinion." With the addition of the National League MVP Giancarlo Stanton, the Yankees, who won 91 games last season, are facing skyrocketing expectations. Said Cashman, "Time will tell, but there's a lot of excitement about what we did last year and the offseason additions. Despite what happened in the postseason, the Red Sox won the division, and Cleveland and Houston each won over 100 games. We know we've got our work cut out for us." And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Okay, so this week I thought I'd change things up a bit. As I said, we're going to go one-on-one with Aaron Boone, and no, he's not joining us on the podcast. Maybe someday down the road, like several 100,000 subscribers down the road. But last week in Tampa, Boone took to the podium and spoke to the assembled media as the Yankees kick off spring training, and I have audio of that press conference. So we're going to play a few of the more interesting segments, because the whole thing ran over 35 minutes, and a couple of reporters repeated questions that were asked earlier for reasons unknown. So we'll cut out the fat, and I'll pause it here and there and give you my thoughts on what's being said. So just looking at the video, he didn't seem remotely thrown by the inevitable questions about his lack of experience, wasn't defensive at all. And while he didn't make any really, blatant, obvious effort to charm the media the way Torre used to, Joe Torre was a master at these things, but Boone was relaxed and friendly. You didn't get that feeling the way you used to get with Girardi, where the unspoken message of his demeanor was sort of, I am only tolerating you because I have to. Girardi always seemed like he'd rather be anywhere else but at a press conference, the DMV, a 5-alarm fire, anywhere. But anyway, let's get this party started. This first question here is from Jack Curry, I believe, who does the pre- and post-game shows on Yes.
Aaron, as you embark on this next part of your career, whose voice or voices are in your head, and what pieces of advice are in your head about making sure this is successful?
Yeah, I think, first of all, my dad, he's been the biggest influence in my life, certainly my baseball life. As most of you guys have known, I've talked to a few different managers frequently that I've kind of picked their brains. One of the things I remember when I first got traded to the Yankees was walking into Joe Torre's office, and his presence, his kind of soothing nature, his ability to put me at ease at the time in what's a whirlwind experience when you get traded as a player, especially coming to a place like New York. So hopefully I take a little piece of what I thought he was great at into this job.
Okay, let's pause it there. So, Torre's name is mentioned a number of times in this press conference. and Girardi's is not mentioned once. I wouldn't read too much into that. I don't think it was an intentional disrespect of any kind. I do think there are some parallels, though, between the current regime change and another one. Once upon a time, there was a manager who was really good but really tightly wound, known for his insane working hours, attention to detail no matter how trivial, a guy who was always prepared, a guy who won a lot, and led the Yankees to a tightly contested playoff series that went the distance, which they lost, after which he was replaced by a manager with a more laid-back personality, who had recently worked in the media at various outlets, ESPN among them. And no, I'm not talking about Joe Girardi and Aaron Boone. I'm talking about Buck Showalter and Joe Torre. I won't labor the point. It's pretty obvious. No, I'm not making any career comparisons between Torre and Boone. Torre obviously had years of managing experience with the Mets, Braves, and the Cardinals. Boone has none. But there are parallels between these two hires. And by the way, there's enormous resistance and outcry by the media to the hiring of Joe Torre. There was that famous headline, Clueless Joe, in the Daily News, I think. I remember Ian O'Connor writing for that publication that Torre was basically a has-been who didn't know what he was doing, didn't know what he was getting into. That was O'Connor's hot take. All right, let's continue. This question here is from Sweeney Murdy of WFAN.
You've got a veteran pitching coach. How much are you leaning on Larry Rothschild to kind of guide you through? How much responsibility do you just give him? How much authority do you just give him to do it?
A lot. When I interviewed for this job, one of the things I was aware of was that Larry Rothschild was one of the guys already on coming back no matter what, which frankly put me at ease a little bit because of the respect I have for him, because of what I know he is, and now getting the opportunity just to get to work with him. We spent a couple days down here about a month ago as a staff, just kind of getting to know each other, getting our program up and running, making sure we're buttoned up as we get down here. He's already been in my office a couple times today, and I frankly do a lot of listening.
Okay, let's pause it there. Now, I thought the fact that the Yankees retained Larry Rothschild was absolutely key, given Boone's inexperience. And not only Boone, his bench coach, Josh Bard, was the Dodgers bullpen coach for a couple of years. That's it. That's his experience. But Larry Rothschild, a pro's pro, who's been with the Yankees since 2011, but his career, his resume goes way back. He's been started as the bullpen coach for the Reds in the 80s, ultimately winning a World Series there, coached for the Braves and the Marlins in the 90s, and managerial experience too. He was actually the first manager of the Tampa Bay Rays and was there for 3 years. And so that's a big shoulder for Aaron Boone to lean on. And Larry's done just an outstanding job with our staff. 2.94 strikeout to walk ratio over the 6 years of his tenure. That's tops in the American League. And when Boone said he's basically doing a lot of listening to Rothschild, that's a good thing. Albert Einstein once said, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. Something to keep in mind for Aaron Boone. We continue. This question is from Brian Hawk, I believe, who covers the Yankees for MLB.com.
Expectations are obviously high for this team. Dellin Betances said, if you guys don't win the World Series, it's not going to be a great year. What would constitute a great year for you?
Well, he's right about the World Series would be a great year. We understand the expectations, and I think one of the things that's exciting for me is to hear some of those comments.
Let's pause it there. I thought it was interesting that it was Betances who said that, given the fact that he was horrendous down the stretch and in the postseason last year. Now, I think what he said was true, but he's a guy coming to camp with a lot to prove, and he has to know that if he doesn't get it together and return to his 2016 form or some semblance thereof, there are guys in that bullpen who can and will take his innings away from him. Now, Betances hired a nutritionist this offseason. He lost 14 pounds, and he's been working intensely on his mechanics to try to get back to the point where he can throw that fastball and his breaking pitch for strikes. But I'll be interested to see if he can bring down those walks and hit batsmen. He hit 11 batsmen last year. That's 2 more than he previously had in his entire career up to that point.
Last year was great. A lot of these guys came of age and had a lot of, I think, viewed it as a very successful season. But I think what stands out being in that room right now, each guy I've spoken to, the hunger is there. And there's no satisfaction with what they're able to accomplish. So we understand it's a very tough road, and that'll be one of our messages, especially for young players that have had success, is, just because things look good right now or things look good on paper and we believe we have a great team, it's also really hard. And there's a lot of little things that can allow you to be a championship club. And those are the things we really want to dive into, especially starting here in spring training. But from what I can tell, the hunger in these guys is real.
Getting to Game 7 of the ALCS last year, I could live with that. I think a lot of Yankee fans actually could live with that, given the fact that the season was such a quantum leap over 2016 and so unexpected. But this year, not so much. This is a championship caliber team, and anything less will amount to an unsuccessful season, no question about it.
Just with Stan and Judge, how do you kind of plan to manage them in terms of playing, outfield, DH, and then how is Judge's shoulder, after the surgery and all that, kind of incorporating him back in?
Yeah, he's doing well. We talk about, managing individuals and getting individuals ready, and we'll certainly be as cautious as we need to be in the early days.
I'll just pause it there for a little update. A Judge, by all reports, is on track to play opening day after having arthroscopic surgery on his left shoulder in November, which I guess cleaned up some cartilage. Now, what I thought was interesting was we discovered this week that Cashman called Judge prior to trading for Stanton to ask about his view on it, which shows you the kind of respect that Judge has earned in the organization already. And that's not to say that Cashman wouldn't have pulled the trigger, without Judge's blessing. I think he definitely would have. But I thought it was a nice show of respect. Anyway, here's the rest of Boone's response.
But I think the one thing that's exciting about both of those guys, an MVP, a Rookie of the Year, guys that are tremendous players. Both guys are really good defenders as well. And both guys, talking about quality individuals, that you can tell that it's about winning for them. It's about trying to chase down that championship for them. And with that comes some sacrifice. And so far, I think there's a lot of buy-in from those guys about being in some different spots in different scenarios. They'll both be very much a part of the process. And it'll be something that kind of is not set in stone right now and is something that will unfold now over the next 5 or 6 weeks about what are the final roles that we view for them.
Now, there have been situations in the past on the Yankees where one superstar has arrived with another already in place, and it hasn't been exactly kumbaya. A-Rod and Jeter had some issues, to say the least. Even though A-Rod, who was the better shortstop, moved to third base, those guys were never exactly soulmates. And A-Rod probably bears more of the blame for that than Jeter. In fact, definitely does. He kind of shot his mouth off when he was on the Texas Rangers, criticizing Jeter's lack of power and his defense. He said he's never had to lead. And after that, A-Rod was pretty much dead to Jeter. And also there was tension, although I think a little less so, when we had Reggie Jackson and Steinbrenner acquire Dave Winfield. But these two, Stanton and Judge, I see this working out really well, given their personalities.
One of our kind of mantras is we want to practice at a championship pace. So we want to be out on the field with energy, moving quickly, practicing as much as we can at game speed. And I think one of the things that I really want to impart on these guys, and that they already do really well in my view, is have fun playing the game. I mean, I think that's what's one of the things that's really helped connect this team is the connection that they've now developed with the fan base.
And that's really true. This was a fun group last year, and I think the Yankees have done a really good job on social media, with gimmicks like the Judge's Chambers last year in right field. I mean, a little cheesy, sure, but a lot of fans go for that. And look, it's working. There was a report last week that the Yankees have sold over 500,000 more tickets compared to last year at this time. And I think that connection with the fans that Boone just talked about there is part of it. And obviously another is the trade for Stanton. The Yankees announced they'll open the gates 3 hours before spring training home games so fans can watch Judge and Stanton and Sanchez destroy baseballs, and they'd be wise to do so in the Bronx as well. I'd show up early to see that, definitely.
Who's going to emerge, to provide us depth in our starting rotation? We feel like we have 3, 4, 5, and maybe even more candidates that at some point could be options if a guy happened to go down. Or so finding depth, I think in our starting rotation will be something we'll be watching closely, and something that I'm looking forward to seeing unfold, and kind of who jumps out and steps up in our eyes.
Yeah, I just have a feeling that if we don't go out and get a free agent, that Justice Sheffield, the left-hander who is part of that trade for Andrew Miller, that Sheffield and not Chance Adams will be the guy we see come up should one of our starters go down. Just a hunch. He's really developed his arsenal. That fastball of his gets up to about 96, and his locker down there in Tampa is right next to Sabathia's. And CC, being the leader he is, I'm sure will develop a relationship with Sheffield, give him some great insights. And with Chance Adams, who's also impressed in AAA. A lot of scouts see him more as a reliever than a starter, and that may be a reason why his name came up a lot in trade rumors this winter and Sheffield's didn't, just because our bullpen is so loaded. But these are the two guys to keep an eye on when it comes to pitchers that may come up from within. Okay, this question here is from Marley Rivera of ESPN Radio.
Not every manager, but a lot of managers develop a reputation. A tough manager, a player's manager, a technical manager. What kind of reputation do you want to have?
Hopefully a good one. Look, I want to be somebody that is known as a smart manager, that makes solid decisions, that's prepared, but also one that when you walk into our clubhouse, hopefully I'm a part of what I believe is a winning culture, but also a culture where guys are at ease, where guys are allowed to be themselves, where it's not a stressful place. It's a place where guys are at work and enjoy coming there to do their job. And hopefully I'm part of creating that atmosphere.
Which is why I think Girardi's gone and Boone was hired. I mean, there was speculation up the wazoo as to why Girardi's contract wasn't renewed. It was because of the non-challenge in the playoff game against the Indians. It was because he benched Gary Sanchez. It was because he defied Cashman by not playing Chris Carter. But I honestly think it was this issue of clubhouse atmosphere, of interaction or lack thereof with players. It was interesting. After the Game 5 win over Cleveland, a reporter asked Brett Gardner basically the same question 6 or 7 times. He was obviously trying to elicit a certain answer. But he basically was asking, did you guys get together and sort of win this one for Girardi? To kind of get him off the hook, which, maybe this guy's seen too many movies. I don't think big league ball players think like that. But I thought it was interesting that despite the fact that, as I said, this question was asked 6 or 7 times, Gardner not only didn't say it was true, he never mentioned Girardi's name, not once. So not a lot of warmth between Girardi and the players over the past few years. So Boone talking about guys being at ease, about keeping in touch with players and building relationships, not only to create a fun atmosphere, but to enable him to have tough conversations when necessary, to be able to challenge players. That, to me, is the central reason why Boone is here, and Girardi will be doing commentary on the MLB network this year. And I wish him all the best. Girardi is going to manage again. His track record is too good to ignore. But hopefully, for his sake, when he returns, he'll chill out just a little bit and work on his personal rapport with players, because the X's and O's he's already great at. Okay, this is Randy Miller of NJ.com.
On a couple of the position battles, do you view Hicks as your starter and center? If so, what do you see the role for Ellsbury? And at second and third, is it possible that you guys could open the season with rookies at both positions? Is that something that's been talked about? Is that highly unlikely?
First on Hicksy, I just saw him. He's in great shape. I think he's really confident. One of those guys that I think's really hungry. That said, it's a long season. It's a long spring training. And Jacoby Ellsbury, we feel like, has a lot of really good baseball left in him.
The Yankees overstocked outfield with Judge, Stanton, Gardner, Hicks, Ellsbury, Clint Frazier. It's like Survivor out there, It's like, and as far as who ultimately gets voted off the island, I think Hicks should rest very easy, and Ellsbury and Clint Frazier should not. Hicks is a superb defensive player with an absolute gun. I don't know if people realize this, but last year the fastest throw in the majors didn't come from Aroldis Chapman, didn't come from Kenley Jansen of the Dodgers. It came from Aaron Hicks in a game against Oakland. He threw an absolute laser beam to home plate, nailing Danny Valencia. That throw was 105.5 miles per hour, faster than Aroldis Chapman's world record 105.1 mile an hour pitch against the Padres in 2010, and Hicks can throw that accurately. He's a faster runner than Ellsbury. He's a switch hitter, and he has more power than Ellsbury. Now, Hicks did struggle in the second half of last year, and he was inconsistent in the playoffs, but that may have had to do with his recovery from 2 separate oblique injuries. So like Bird, Hicks has got to prove that he can stay healthy and put up those numbers all year. And I think a lot of Yankee fans, including yours truly, are hoping that maybe Ellsbury gets to showcase those remaining baseball skills on some other team. Okay, here's Boone.
As far as the second and third, absolutely. You know, when we talk about Wade and Torres and Andujar, those are guys that are really knocking on the door to be big league ball players, and we feel like eventually impact big league ball players. So, yeah, I think it's a real possibility that could happen. Again, that's something, though, that will play out over the next 5-6 weeks, and hopefully we'll make the best decision as we break camp and head to Toronto.
So the late breaking news is that the Yankees yesterday traded for infielder Brandon Drury in a 3-team deal with the Diamondbacks and the Rays, which tells me that they're not 100% convinced that Andujar is ready to start at third base. Now, Drury is a solid player, 1.6 win player last year, good fielder, and in 135 games last year, 13 home runs, 63 RBIs, so solid. And he's a bargain at just over $500,000 this year. So given the fact that the Yankees, by all reports, are very interested in signing Manny Machado a year from now, and the interest appears to be mutual, this makes sense as a placeholder situation. And the 2 prospects we gave up, Nick Solak and Taylor Widener, aren't even remotely elite prospects. But I wouldn't count out Andujar completely. He hit .315 last year in AAA with 16 homers and 82 RBIs. The question with him is defense. And that's something to keep an eye on once spring training games start on Friday. That first game, by the way, against the Tigers, that's going to be on the Yes Network with a 1 o'clock start. So we'll see how Andujar does patrolling the hot corner. But, you know, we have some insurance now with Drury, so that's a good thing. Okay, here's our final excerpt of Boone's press conference.
A lot is being made of the 2017 241 home run record for the New York Yankees and wanting a goal to repeat or go even further. Can you specify one particular goal that you have for the New York Yankees in 2018?
Win the last game. Look, I want us to get better. And, you know, hopefully myself in a small way, our staff, front office, hopefully we're getting our players better, and we're a part of that. However that shows up in a home run standpoint, I have no idea, but I know what's exciting about that room is the one thing we do care about is winning, and that'll always be the driving forces. We want to win.
The Yankees are set to obliterate the single-season team record of 264 home runs set by the Mariners in '97. But honestly, I've never been one to get overly excited about records. Even the Hall of Fame sort of leaves me cold, really, but just winning, that's what I care about. And most of all, as Boone just said, winning the last game. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs in Game 6 of the 1977 World Series. Which of these 4 Dodger pitchers gave up Reggie's 3rd home run? Was it A, Don Sutton, B, Tommy John, C, Charlie Huff, or D, Bert Hooton? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
All right, back here on Bronx Bombers, and our featured guest once again is Jonathan Eig, author of Luckiest Man, the best-selling biography of Lou Gehrig. Jonathan's here with us for part 2 of our conversation, which we begin with a question about Eleanor, Gehrig's wife. Now, Eleanor really did have a profound impact on Gehrig's life during their 8 years together. They married in 1933, and you go into quite a bit of detail on her background and personality, very different from Gehrig's on both counts. Talk about what that relationship meant to Gehrig's evolution as a human being.
Eleanor really helped him grow up. You know, she insisted that he stop and sign autographs. Gehrig used to sneak in to the stadium. He would avoid the players' entrance just so that he didn't have to sign autographs. And Eleanor said, no, you're a star. These kids look up to you. You have to go through the players' entrance and you have to sign autographs. And she insisted that he stop just accepting whatever contract the Yankees sent him every year. She said, you know, you should negotiate. You're the star of this team. You deserve more money. She hired a publicist for him, the same one who worked with Babe Ruth. She helped him get an audition for a Hollywood movie to play the role of Tarzan, which he didn't get because he was actually too muscular. So Eleanor really helped him. She took him into the city and exposed him to opera and theater. And I think it was hugely important for his development as a person. He began to really take a little bit of pleasure in life. It wasn't all about baseball. It wasn't all about hard work. And he was able to break free a little bit from his mother, thanks to Eleanor.
Now, Gehrig's first manager was Miller Huggins, but for most of his career, it was Joe McCarthy. And they became quite close. McCarthy, who spoke with great emotion at Lou Gehrig Day in 1939, was absolutely devastated by Gehrig's passing. He had appointed Gehrig captain in 1935. That was a role that Gehrig took very seriously. Talk a bit about McCarthy and why those two got on so well, and also how the team culture changed as it transitioned from the swashbuckling 20s group dominated by Babe Ruth to the Depression-era group that was dominated by Gehrig and then ultimately DiMaggio.
Lou always really liked authority figures, and I think almost any manager would have been like a father figure to him. And Joe McCarthy was a perfect one in many ways because McCarthy loved rules and loved operating with a set of principles, and he was a great leader, and I think the players all really liked him, but he sort of adopted Lou and tried to teach Lou to think of himself as a leader, especially with Babe fading and leaving. Gehrig really becomes the captain and the spiritual leader of the team, and he sets a much more serious tone than Babe Ruth, of course, and it's really the image that the Yankees would carry forth for generations, this business-like approach to the game. Now the Yankees are, they don't let you wear long hair or mustache or beard, right? But Gehrig is really the first. He's this strong, silent kind of a captain and makes the Yankees into this kind of a more serious bunch than they ever could have been with Babe Ruth around. And I think that's something that DiMaggio talked about a lot, that Gehrig was really a quiet leader, but he led very effectively by setting an example.
Now, your book goes into really unprecedented detail about those last difficult years of Gehrig's life and his struggle with ALS, a neurological disease that was a death sentence in 1939 and remains one today, sadly. A rare disease, thankfully, but a harrowing ordeal for the afflicted and their loved ones. But Gehrig started to experience some early symptoms during the 1938 season: weakness, fatigue, incoordination, falling down on the base paths. Talk about that initial phase of Gehrig's illness, Jonathan, and how he ended up a patient at the world-famous Mayo Clinic in Minnesota.
When Gehrig showed up for spring training in 1938, he began to complain that he didn't feel right, that he was getting blisters on his hands. He was tripping. He went golfing one day and just felt like his feet weren't coming up. He was like kicking the grass. He was tripping over curbs. And as the season progressed, he kept saying that he didn't feel right, that something was wrong, that he tried changing his batting stance. He had never, tinkered with his batting stance in all the years of his career. He began ordering lighter bats too, which was really shocking to me, that, he had used the same bat his whole career, same weight, same length. And now in 1938, he starts constantly dropping down to a lighter bat as the season moves through. And, it's as if he knows something's happening to his body, but he doesn't know what it is. And, some of the reporters think, well, he's just getting old. Some of them say it's because he's never taken a day off and the fatigue is setting in and maybe it's hitting him all at once. And by the end of the season, his numbers are down dramatically. I think he still hit like 295 and 29 home runs, drove in 114 RBIs. And so he still had what most people would consider a fantastic season. But for Gehrig, it was way off of his usual. And it's clear now that something was wrong. In the offseason, he did go to a doctor. He went to just a sort of a general practitioner, and the doctor didn't see anything wrong with him, told him to try changing his diet. And he came back in the spring for spring training, and now everybody could see something was wrong. He'd lost a ton of weight. And if you look at pictures from spring training in 1939, it's shocking, really, how he doesn't even fit his uniform anymore. And he was playing so badly that it was embarrassing to him and to everybody in the press. He was dropping easy throws. He was having trouble getting out of the way of inside pitches. He couldn't hit for power at all. Everybody was talking about it. What's wrong with Gehrig? What's happened to him? Why does he look so terrible? But he still tried to stay in the lineup. He thought maybe it was a virus and he'd shake it off. He didn't want to lose that streak of his. So he kept playing and pushing through it. He did take a couple games off during spring training, which for Lou was unusual. But when the season started, he was in the lineup. He played the first few games, and then finally, he became concerned that he was really hurting the team. There was a routine play at first base that he couldn't make. He had to, and everybody kind of congratulated him when he managed to somehow get back to the bag in time for the putout. But he knew that it should have been an easy play. And then finally, he took himself out of the lineup and agreed to go see some doctors at the Mayo Clinic, and that was it. They diagnosed him instantly. The doctors could see right away what was happening to him.
Now, the physicians at the Mayo Clinic diagnosed Gehrig correctly without any trouble, but there was a good deal of trouble in how this diagnosis was ultimately disseminated to the media and the public, and the resulting confusion created real problems for Gehrig during a very vulnerable period. You describe an article published in 1940, I believe, which implied that Gehrig may have infected his teammates who were playing poorly at the time. This is, of course, impossible. It's not a communicable disease. Gehrig sued that publication for libel, by the way. And while I'm certainly not excusing the article, it's horrendously irresponsible journalism, but I can't help but wonder if the facts had been more clearly laid out to the public, then maybe that article, never gets written. So before we get to what Gehrig himself may have been told about his illness, which is a whole other story, talk a bit about what the media and the public were told at the time.
When Gehrig was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic, they sent him back with a letter that said he had ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and they compared it. They said it was a form of poliomyelitis. And when people saw polio, they thought, oh, it's like polio. It could be contagious. So people misunderstood. And as a result of that, not only did they think that it was potentially contagious, they also thought that it was not fatal because, a lot of people survive polio and you might need braces on your legs or you might need a wheelchair. So it created a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. I think even those people who were there when Gehrig gave his farewell speech and heard him say, I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth, even then people didn't really know for sure that he was dying. They thought maybe this was just his way of saying goodbye to baseball, that he was never going to play again. So there was a lot of confusion about it. And it wasn't all the media's fault. ALS was just completely unknown at that time. It was such a rare disease.
Well, it was unknown to the general public, but it was certainly known to the neurological community at the time, and they knew the ultimate outcome. Now, there were about 200 letters between Gehrig and Dr. Paul O'Leary, that was Gehrig's primary physician at the Mayo Clinic. And I got to be honest, Jonathan, as I read some of what O'Leary wrote to Gehrig about his prognosis, I found myself getting a little angry on Gehrig's behalf. Gehrig in his letters has been practically begging for candor about his outlook. I'll quote one here. This is Gehrig about 15 months before his death, writing to O'Leary, quote, "Please don't judge me a crybaby or believe me to be losing my guts. But as always, I would like to know the actual truth and not continue to receive encouraging reports which have little or no chance of materializing, or to continue to live in false hopes. There is definitely something going on within my body which I do not understand, and which I would appreciate immensely if you would discuss with Dr. Woltman, and please," that word's in all caps, "reveal to me your honest opinions," unquote. And here's O'Leary writing back, quote, "I know by innuendos you have the impression that people do not arrest the progress of ALS. You remember in our last talk, I tried to emphasize the point that you would probably progress to a certain degree, following which you would either remain stationary with some residual signs like numbness in your fingertips and difficulty in walking, or that there would be an improvement in many of these temporary inconveniences." And O'Leary goes on here at the end, quote, "Courage and persistence in treatment invariably result in an arrest of the process such as you have," unquote. Which, O'Leary, who was a well-credentialed physician at a first-rate facility, but O'Leary certainly knew those words were false, Jonathan. And so to my mind, I wonder if unintentionally he made a horrendous situation even worse for Gehrig by adding this element of false hopes or even guilt on Gehrig's part. He was always worried about letting people down, that his condition wasn't improving or at least remaining stationary, as O'Leary puts it. But what's your take, Jonathan, on this whole issue of candor between Gehrig and his physicians? And I use the plural because he saw a number of them both in Minnesota and New York.
It is disconcerting, and it's hard to know exactly what to make of it. I can understand why they'd want to keep his hopes up and to keep his spirits up and not tell him that this was hopeless. And in fact, Eleanor was writing to Dr. O'Leary and asking him to do just that. Eleanor was saying, we must continue to give him hope. And I don't know that was such a good thing. I mean, a lot of patients go through that. They give themselves false hope. They find some crazy new potential cure. They fly off to some foreign country to try some new experimental drug. And, it's common for people to seek some kind of a way to avoid the notion that they're doomed. But to deliberately mislead the way O'Leary did, I think is wrong. And I know that other doctors there, when Gehrig was diagnosed, I know that they told him that ALS was fatal. But nevertheless, O'Leary is creating the strong impression that those doctors may have been wrong, that there is a chance here. And as you read there, he said, invariably, this disease can be arrested. I mean, that's just a flat-out lie.
Now, did those other doctors you mentioned tell him it was fatal or that it was just incurable? Because he writes a letter to Eleanor from the Mayo Clinic, which says something like, it's likely that I'll need to walk with a cane in 10 to 15 years, and I won't be able to play ball again. That doesn't sound like a particularly realistic estimate of what was about to happen. So do you think that Gehrig, in fact, knew that his disease was fatal or simply that it was incurable?
We don't know. He may have been writing that to Eleanor to try to let her down a little easier too. But the doctors who I talked to who worked with those doctors at the Mayo Clinic, I interviewed doctors who were trained by the doctors who diagnosed Gehrig, and they said these men were such professionals and so serious that they would never have intentionally misled a patient, that they would have absolutely told him that this was fatal. But very often a patient hears what they want to hear. Some cases move more slowly than others. A patient hears that, well, we have had occasions where someone has lived with this for, many, many years, even decades. And that's what the patient wants to hear because that's what they need to process this. And that may be what happened to Gehrig, but ultimately we don't really know.
Okay, Lou Gehrig Day, July 4th, 1939. We all know the magnificent speech that Gehrig gave that day. It's one of the most moving ever delivered, in my opinion. Of course, the title of your book, Luckiest Man, derives from it. Now, something you cleared up for me that I've always wondered was whether that speech was delivered off the cuff or not. Tell us what you found out about any preparation that may or may not have gone into the speech that day, and any other interesting details you uncovered about that event, which was recreated magnificently in your book.
Oh, thanks. We don't know for sure. Eleanor said that he had some help from a writer, but there's really no way to know. The writer who Eleanor mentioned never took any credit for having contributed to this speech. And my strong feeling is that Gehrig did not have help, that he wrote it himself, that he may have jotted some notes the night before about what he was going to say, but he really believed that he wasn't going to make a speech that day. And I think that's the most important thing to remember, that he absolutely insisted that he was not going to speak, and he didn't even want to be out there on the field and begged Joe McCarthy to let him out of it. And when it came time to speak, he even said, no, I'm not going to say anything. And they began to roll up the microphone wires. And then Joe McCarthy pushed him out there and said, come on, you got to say something. So we don't know whether Gehrig had rehearsed these words at all, whether he had thought about what to say. But again, just given his personality, my hunch is that he had thought about what he would say. And it's so beautiful. Because it feels so unrehearsed and so unpolished, and in some ways it's even like ridiculous. He thanks his opposing teams, he thanks the ushers, he thanks his mother-in-law, and he goes on to say basically that he's lucky no matter what kind of a diagnosis he's received, never mind that his baseball career is over. He's lucky because he's had all of these wonderful things in his life. So it's not about this diagnosis. It's about the wonderful life that he's had up until this point, and that's why he's grateful. And that's a beautiful sentiment, something I think that continues to inspire everybody who hears it.
Now, it's always been a bit frustrating to me that we're able to hear the beginning and the end of that speech, but the rest seems to have been lost. Tell us why that might be.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed. There's only 4 sentences that survive on tape or on film, and I keep hoping that somebody's going to find one in their attic. it was recorded. It was aired on the radio, and newspaper reporters, of course, were there. And there were some cameras filming it for the newsreels, for the movie tone news, and those newsreels, they edited the parts that they wanted to use to show in movie theaters, but they shed the parts that they didn't need. And apparently nobody saved the complete footage of it, so we did not have a complete recording. I was able to piece it together as best I could from those 4 sentences that survive on film, plus looking at all of the different newspaper coverage of the event and trying to find sentences that matched up, that were reported by multiple news outlets similarly or in the same way. But a lot of the newspaper reporters quoted it differently because these guys are not using tape recorders. They're just jotting it down by hand.
Final question, Jonathan, and you've been so generous with your time. We really appreciate it. Some amusing facts in your epilogue about the 1942 film production Pride of the Yankees, seminal baseball film. And what I found amusing was the fact that the producer, Sam Goldwyn, as well as the star, Gary Cooper, knew basically nothing about baseball. And Goldwyn was less than enthused about the project initially. You have his response here to the proposal for the film. Goldwyn said, quote, "It's box office poison. If people want baseball, they go to the ballpark," unquote. But tell the listeners how Goldwyn was ultimately convinced to produce the film, which was a big success, and how Gary Cooper adjusted to his role in that film.
Goldwyn heard Gehrig's speech. Somebody played him the film of Gehrig's farewell speech and was moved by that. And then he was also convinced that, the war was on and a lot of American men were overseas, that this could work as a love story, that there might actually be a chance to get women to show up to watch this movie by making Eleanor a bigger character and by portraying this not as a baseball story, but as a tragic tale of lost love. And that's really how they ended up selling it. That's why it has a dance scene and a musical number in there, which, is not something you'd put in for baseball fans. And Gary Cooper, grew up on a farm, a strong physical actor, but hadn't played baseball much, if at all, and you could tell, and he could not, for the life of him, swing the bat left-handed. So that became a real problem in filming this thing. The solution that they found was to sew the number 4 on the back of his uniform in reverse, and to let him swing right-handed, and to have him run to third base instead of to first base, and then to flip the film. And if you watch carefully, you can see that the shadows in the movie are wrong.
Luckiest Man. Pick it up. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local independent bookstore if they still have those. It's a gripping tale, well told, and with some remarkable photographs as well, by the way, including a few I'd never seen. Jonathan, great work here. Thank you so much for being part of the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll come back. More Bronx Bombers in just a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which pitcher gave up Reggie Jackson's 3rd home run in Game 6 of the 1977 World Series? The answer? C. Charlie Huff. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. The oddsmakers in Vegas have set the Yankees' win total for 2018 at 93.5. Are you taking the over or the under? And 89% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said they're taking the over, and 11% are taking the under. So this is an easy call. I'm taking the over as well. I mean, are these guys insane? 93.5? Really? After winning 91 games last year and then adding the National League MVP plus full seasons of Sonny Gray, Canely, and Robertson? This gets us 2.5 more wins? I don't know if some of these dudes got zapped in the cranium by that Nevada sunlight or what. And it wasn't just the Yankees. They've got the Nationals winning 5.5 fewer games than last year for no particular reason. I mean, all the Nationals' big shots are back, and they also get Adam Eaton back, who's finally recovered from his knee injury. He's a 6.2 win player 2 years ago. So, I mean, did the NL East improve? Yeah, a bit. I mean, the Phillies, Mets, and I guess to some extent the Braves. Actually, I think the Mets had a really good offseason. They picked up left-hander Jason Vargas last week, Todd Frazier, Adrian Gonzalez, among others. They'll win more games than last year. I mean, it wouldn't be hard. They won 70 last year. But the Marlins will be substantially worse. I mean, I honestly think the Yankees AAA club could beat the Marlins as currently constructed, or maybe deconstructed is a better word. So that Nationals pick was weird. Milwaukee was also weird. They've got them winning 4.5 fewer games than last year. Now, I don't know if these guys follow the news, but Milwaukee added Christian Yelich and Lorenzo Cain. And the Reds and the Pirates have gotten worse. So, I'm not an advocate for sports betting. I don't do it myself. But if you're a gambler, I'd take the over on Milwaukee, and I'd also take the over on the Angels. Vegas has them at 84.5 wins. Now, this is less egregious. That would be a 4.5 win improvement over last year. And they do reside in that tough neighborhood with the Astros. But the Mariners and the Rangers have done nothing this offseason. And the A's are going to be dreck. But the Angels have had maybe the busiest offseason of any team. They won the Ohtani sweepstakes. They also signed shortstop Zach Cozart. He'll play third, actually, most likely. They've got that wizard Andrelton Simmons at short. They also traded for Ian Kinsler and signed Justin Upton to a 5-year deal. I think this is a 90-win team if Trout stays healthy. But the Yankees picking up only 2.5 games? I mean, come on. Giancarlo Stanton was a 7.6 win player last year. We get Canely, Robertson, and Gray for a full year. That adds close to 4 wins combined. And the guys we lose, let's see. So Castro, the best of them, was a 2-win player. Headley, 1.8. Holiday was a 0-win player, so he was a replacement level player. And Chris Carter, a negative 0.7 win player, worse than a replacement player. So basically, as far as player value, we gain 11.2 wins and lose a total of 3.1, the difference being 8.1. And that's not even counting what Gleyber Torres and Miguel Andujar, and hopefully a full season of Bird, are going to give us. So again, take the over on the Bombers and run, because this Yankee club, at the very least, is a 96-win team, in my opinion, and that's being conservative. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Gil in Borough Park. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or on our Facebook page. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Gil writes, I liked your comparison of the different baseball announcers. I haven't heard that White Sox guy, but he sounds terrible. Personally, I don't see how anybody could do a worse job than ESPN Sunday Night Baseball. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but it seems like the production elements they use are purposely designed to distract me from the game, which is all I want to see. Serious question, is ESPN trying to drive away viewers? That's a phenomenal question, and look, Gil, I get it, believe me, and I can see how one might think that, but since you said serious question, first of all, I'll answer your question at its most literal level. So no, I don't think the head honchos at ESPN are calling meetings and focus groups and crafting memos on how to drive away viewers. That would be an odd business model, to say the least, but they do such an atrocious job, as you say, on so many levels. So let's take a look at some of those levels, those circles of hell. But before we commence firing here, just to be clear, this is exclusively a critique of ESPN's baseball telecasts. Their college football, although not great, isn't nearly as bad, and their website, some of the baseball writers there actually are excellent. So this is purely an attack on the telecast, which, first of all, they insist on putting this digital strike zone on the screen for every pitch. I mean, they call it the K zone. And then after the ball is received by the catcher, we get this digital circle where it landed in the catcher's glove, as if we somehow lack the ability to follow the white ball to its landing place. So the K zone, in my view, is an abomination. And just do a search on Twitter for K-Zone during a Sunday night game this year, and you'll get heaping portions of vitriol ranging from threats to boycott ESPN to deeply, deeply sarcastic praise, the kind that Twitter does so well. Now, when this was introduced a couple years ago, it was universally panned, okay? But ESPN was undaunted. These geniuses somehow know what's best for their viewers. Here were ESPN's remarks in the face of, again, near universal criticism. Quote, "We are absolutely unequivocally committing to K-Zone live on every game for every pitch. So you can start to see the logic of Gil's question. The K-Zone does nothing to enhance the viewer's enjoyment of the game. It is distracting, it is jarring, and it makes, the most beautiful game in the world look like a cartoon. I mean, I get that Disney, the animation pioneer, owns ESPN, but do us a favor, save the digital gimmicks for Toy Story 4 and leave the ball games alone. I mean, if you're absolutely determined to stick with this idiocy, use it on replays, not during live action. Also, I'll never understand, never, why ESPN insists after a home run on having a cameraman with a shoulder rig follow the player down the third base line to home plate. What do we learn from this? Anything. Anybody, really? Do these producers think we have some deep, unspoken desire to know what it feels like to run alongside a player as he approaches home plate? I mean, with 1 billion cameras with zoom lenses covering these games, believe me, we're just fine with a stable close-up. We don't need all of a sudden to be jarred into nausea by handheld camera work like we're watching one of the Bourne movies with Matt Damon, okay? So, and then the commentators, Dan Schulman, actually he's gone now, thank God, Carl Ravitch and Jessica Mendoza, it's just, first of all, I've never thought 3 in a booth was a good idea. Second of all, none of these people have any more personality than a single-cell amoeba, although actually Mendoza's improving a little, but, forced humor that's the opposite of funny, stating the painfully obvious. And why do we need to constantly see the announcers on camera, like ever, really? It's not enough. We have to listen to them jabber nonstop as if 1 or 2 seconds of silence might explode the planet. But they cut to these people every single inning. And sometimes, and this is even worse, they go split screen with the game on the left as if it's some sort of, distraction ESPN is barely tolerating. So bottom line, the producers of ESPN Sunday Night Baseball need to be deleted from the industry and taught a different trade. And if that sounds like Joseph Stalin, I'm sorry, but that's my stance. And finally, if you want to fix pace of play, Commissioner Rob Manfred, how about a sit down with ESPN about the facts of life, because they're constantly delaying start times and they insist on starting these games at 8 o'clock on a Sunday when most teams have to travel the next day and fans have to go to sleep and get up for work or school. And by the way, ESPN has absolutely pummeled Disney's stock. 150 layoffs last year, subscribers, ratings way down. Not just baseball, by the way. Monday Night Football, their numbers are in total free fall. And despite all that, they insist on tripling down on everything they do wrong. So Gil, I'm with you, brother. And look, I appreciate the fact that these remarks may sound like a bit of a diatribe to some listeners, and some of you may not agree with me, and that's totally fine. But, I'm not going to lie, and I'll certainly continue to make war on ESPN until they get it together. I want to thank everybody for listening to us again this week on Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well. Share it with everybody you know, and I mean that literally. Omit no one. But most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.